Well, welcome everyone. Today is Friday, July 31st, which is really hard to believe. It's wonderful to see you all. I understand that there was a great conversation last week with our colleague and friend, Fatima Pakas, who continues to work on her Fulbright here in the United States and volunteering with IPM simultaneously. We're very hopeful that she'll be able to complete her studies this coming year and be joining the IPM staff again, perhaps in the US on an OPT visa for a year or back in El Salvador or some other country around the world. But she's, as if you hadn't met Fatima before, an absolutely remarkable young professional woman who's deeply, deeply committed to our mission and spent her entire life working for justice in El Salvador, and comes from a remarkable family that have been friends with IPM in an extended capacity for quite some time. So I'm sure it was great to be with her, and we'll continue to be in touch with her and hear more from her in the coming months. Today, I'm not sure where you are, but most of the US is sort of going through a heat wave. So, well, if there's a fan humming or air conditioning in the background, we'd ask you to mute that. The connection seemed to be a little spotty with all the heat and everyone at home on the internet, but we're thrilled to come back a couple months after our initial presentation from Alyssa Bovell on how IPM is responding through a particular research project related to COVID-19, to have a less formal conversation today about that project and how it's coming along. Alyssa sort of gave us an overview as our Director of Monitoring, Evaluation, Assessment, and Learning from her home in Atlanta, where she just completed a master's at Emory University. And unfortunately, she's not able to be with us today. She's getting a certificate related to gender equity and development. And that program, that coursework is on Friday. So she continues her studies and building up her background and preparing her for what I hope is a long and continues to be a very fruitful future with IPM. Today, we're thrilled to be joined once again by Eneyda Ramos, who is our Regional Associate for Latin America and the Caribbean. You've heard and seen from Eneyda a couple times since we started these regional forums back in May. And she's been working hand in hand with Adele Zayas, who's also on the call, and Alyssa on the COVID-19 MEAL, which again is an abbreviation for Monitoring, Evaluation, and Assessment and Learning Research Project that we've been engaging in with our partners around the world. This came out of our desire really back at the early days of the international lockdown to be able to document more fully the impact of IPM's work on our partners, but also the assets and needs that they've self-identified in their respective communities, and how we might build upon them as we look forward to our 50th anniversary year. Some of you will recall that we initially thought about a project related directly to how we define partnership. And we thought, and I'm reminded of, frankly, I don't know if you've heard of Robert Putnam, who's wrote the well-known book Bowling Alone, but is sort of an expert at a cafe in Italy, the couple of Harvard PhD colleagues, and thinking that with all the money coming into Italy and being distributed equally across the regions, that this would sort of be the perfect test case to see how the different Italian regions would respond to the investment they were getting from the national government and from other governments internationally, and then evaluate sort of social capital in each given part of the country based on the way those funds were allocated and a number of social and economic development indicators related to participation in democracy, women in the workforce, children's education, health, and alike. And he put out a wonderful study 5 decades later after tracking all that. And I remember reading it when I first moved to Rome, and just because I'm fascinated by this kind of stuff, I'll share it with you. What they found was the greatest examples of social capital, those of you who have traveled with Italy with me know this, were in what was known as the red belt. sort of the former leftist parts of Italy that were the partisans in the fight against Mussolini, and then were sort of kept out of power by the US, the mafia, and the Vatican really working together after the Second World War, which is a whole nother story. But they were the most developed. They had the highest examples of social capital. The second highest were the principalities in the northern region, sort of above the River Po, places like Lombardy and Venice, frankly, and ironically, the places that were most directly impacted by the current pandemic. And part of that is that the far-right governments that have been in power there over the last, say, 30 years have really disinvested in public health care. And so when the pandemic hit northern Italy, the poor, the elderly were not able to get the kind of health care they were able to get in other parts of Italy, particularly the so-called Red Belt, because the hospitals have been privatized and they were not keeping adequate supplies, a bit of what we've encountered in this country with PPE and testing equipment. The next level was the area around the Papal States, so not only Rome, but places like Assisi and Perugia. And then finally, the least developed was the South, which was controlled by the mafia, which again had worked, or organized crime, which really has three different names in southern Italy, which was directly involved, those organized crime factions, along with our government and the Vatican, in trying to keep, if you will, the communists from coming to power in Italy after the war. So that's my 5 minutes of post-war Italian history for you and how it relates to social capital. But the reason it's relevant is I've always had that study in the back of my mind, is sort of, when does society and the world present us with test case where we can sort of incubate and see what really is happening? And the bonds of social capital, which IPM defines as partnership, that we think are so important to our work, will they hold? And how will they hold in the kind of really tragic situation in which so many of our partners are living right now, and particularly in the countries that I'm sure you've been seeing in the media, like Brazil, India, certainly El Salvador, from which Eneyda hails, who are in the midst, really, of still the peak of the pandemic, and really it's very much out there use the pandemic also as an excuse to crack down on their respective populations. So we wanted to come back today and hear a little bit from Eneyda, who was going to make a presentation to the board at our last meeting, the International Executive Board of IPM, and give her an opportunity, and all of you an opportunity, to share and learn a little bit about where we are with the study right now. A couple points of clarification before Eneyda begins her conversation. It's really important to Eneyda, the rest of our Latin American Caribbean staff, and particularly Alyssa, given the real stringent research that she wants to be a part of and lead us through, that we maintain the confidentiality of all those with whom we're speaking. So during this presentation and in subsequent presentations in October and November likely, and into the new year, we're going to be protecting the confidentiality of those who have shared their stories with us until we have formal permission and a final product, if you will, to share with the wider IPM family. So while Eneyda and I, and perhaps Adela and Vicky, can share some of the stories that we've heard, or I can share what I've heard from Mahesh, what's happening in India, we will not be using the names of individuals to protect that confidentiality. We also want to make sure that you know that anything that Eneyda says at this point is is as much anecdotal, or what would be the appropriate way of saying it, qualitative rather than quantitative. There are some numbers that she can share about how many people we've spoken with already, but we haven't done the real hard data analysis yet to be able to say specifically and numerically how many of our partners think that IPM's response to COVID has been this effective or not, how their own response has been effective or not. And certainly not to be making recommendations at this point about how IPM might continue to move forward, not only with the pandemic, which probably, certainly in many countries around the world, will continue to be a real issue, well into next year, but also how we define partnership and how we support one another in our work going forward. But before I turn it over to Reed's book about the virtual immersion experience program. And as you all know, we've been working very hard, particularly Victoria Jimenez, the coordinator of our immersion experience program, with Adela and Alyssa and others on developing, if you will, a complementary or supplementary virtual immersion experience schools, congregations, corporations, faith. We begin to order that with the coming U.S. Labor Day holiday at the beginning of September. And Vicki remarkably has put together just a really a turnkey program at this point. We had a conversation with a Methodist pastor outside of DC who traveled with us to El Salvador last November, and we've already committed to doing a beta test, if you will, with his youth group starting in September. We'll also be running a pilot virtual immersion with my congregation here in Maine starting in November. So we have about 4 months of testing that we're going to be doing with a couple of populations. We also are already longstanding academic partners, so we're looking at the program fully in January. But to the question that I was asked earlier, which is how can I be a part of IPM's virtual immersion experience program now? What we're hoping to do is to sometime in the early autumn present a virtual immersion experience program to any donor or friend of IPM who would like to participate. Vicki and I have not yet identified the theme. We think this will be a thematic program, and it's likely that it'll be on gender equity and the human rights protection for women and girls. But we want to be able to provide folks like all of you an opportunity to have this experience while you're still in quarantine or stuck at home, whatever the case might be. So if you're interested in possibly participating in that open, what we call a donor and friend immersion this autumn, please let Vicki know, and her email is V Jimenez. You can probably see her name on the screen there, VJIMENEZ. Again, VJIMENEZ at IPMconnect.org. That's V Jimenez at IPMconnect.org. You're certainly welcome to join in the congregational immersion or the faith-based immersion, if you will, that will take place to El Salvador in October and November. But if you're interested in sort of other opportunities, I would invite you to reach out to Vicki. Typically runs 12 to 15 hour to an hour and a half sessions over the course of a semester, a long weekend, or the normal sort of week of an immersion. The fee is $500 a person. There is scholarship funding available, but that seems to be the right number that we've settled on that will help IPM support our partners appropriately in an adjust manner for their participation in the program, but also to help supplement the income that clearly we've been losing from the loss of the normal immersion experience program. I would also tell you that if you go to our website right now, we've already begun a soft launch of the VI, I'm calling it VEEP, travel materials. And so if you go to the website, I won't share the screen, but it's the header between the immersion experience program and our project, and I think the events. And it just says VIEP, or Virtual Immersion Experience Program, and you can get additional information about it there, including how to reach out to Vicki directly. So again, if you're interested in participating in a virtual immersion experience program, please let Vicki or I know directly. We have had some conversation about a board gathering, sort of in conjunction with our South Asian partners, as we had planned for November. But after speaking with Mahesh yesterday, I know that folks aren't ready to do that yet, certainly not able to travel in the way they would like in that part of the world. Does anybody have any further questions about the virtual immersion experience program? I know that Vicki's on the line, but I could also try to answer those for you if you have them at this time. Okay, well then I'm going to turn this now over to Eneyda Ramos, who you know, I think most of you, who or at least I can see on the Zoom call, I'm not sure on Facebook, obviously, but know that Eneyda joined the IPM staff in October of last year, and she's been working really hard as the regional associate for Latin America and the Caribbean. She spent almost 2 months, not by choice, but by chance or pandemic, in the Dominican Republic with Victoria earlier this year, when they were sort of trapped there and unable to get back to her native El Salvador at the time of really the initial onset of the pandemic. And she's been working increasingly with Adela Zayas, who is now serving as our International Director of Programs and Partnerships, to coordinate our response in Latin America and the Caribbean and our work with our partners, but also increasingly, and we're looking forward to more of this in the autumn, at least North American autumn, and in the new year, that she'll be supporting us with our work with our project partners internationally. She's been in communication with Mahesh about some things, and been hugely supportive. Been working with Alyssa Oster to maybe spend 10, 15 minutes now, just informally updating you all on where we are with the project, and then we'll open it up for a question and answer session as we typically do each Friday morning. Vicky, Eneyda, can I ask you to unmute and begin?
Yes, thank you so much, Joe, for the introduction, and good morning, everybody. My name is Eneyda Ramos, and I want to share with you what we have been working on during the assessment process. Part of my job has been working on the data collection that consisted of a survey that was worked by Alyssa. I was in charge to conduct the interviews. The overarching assessment questions that guides this process is related to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on women, men, girls, and boys, and other vulnerable demographics, the way project partners are responding to the outbreak, the capacities that IPM have to support project partners' responses to the virus outbreak, and how project partners consider IPM to adapt to post-COVID-19 reality, and what contingency plans are considered to respond to future crises. The steps that we follow to conduct the interviews were, well, firstly, we clarified that one part of these interviews will be for the coordinators of each project partner to know, on the one hand, their personal reality, that is, how the coordinator's personal life has affected either as a man or as a woman, and on the other hand, to know how their organization is facing the consequences of the pandemic. Now, we know that many of our project partners are barely surviving since the alliances built with other larger NGOs have stopped supporting them. This knowledge is important to know if IPM can respond to any of their needs and continue the work so great that each of them performs. Second, we clarified that it was necessary to know the reality of some participants to understand their situation, to know how the community is, and to try to measure the impacts of COVID-19. This process is important since not all people suffer from the pandemic the same way, and it is necessary to know where the support of IPM can go. Third, we clarify the mechanism that will be used to conduct the interviews, meaning if we are going to use WhatsApp calls, Zoom meetings, etc., so that both the coordinators and the participant have easy access to answer the questions and not take up so much time on them. We started this process on May 19th with El Salvador. The first person we interviewed was Carlos Diaz from El Patronato Lidia Cogiola. The second interview was held on May 20th with Acumujersa. On May 26th, we interviewed to Conchita from Musas Creativas, and we end the interviews with all the coordinators from El Salvador on June 24th, with Ana Greg from Nutravida. Then we continued with Colombia, with Marta and Luz Dari. We end these interviews on July 7th. Later, we continue with the beneficiaries from El Salvador. Meanwhile, we were waiting for the coordinators from Nicaragua to confirm. Yesterday, I completed 2 interviews with beneficiaries from Nicaragua, and last week with Maria Félix, who is the coordinator for Mujer y Comunidad in Nicaragua. Now I want to share that the challenges encountered during the process have been communication with project partners. Since many have little internet access or tight agendas, it has been difficult to contact them. In some cases, we have managed to solve this barrier, and in others, it has not. In El Salvador, we did calls or send the interviews through WhatsApp to give the opportunity that the coordinators and participants could answer according to their convenience. In Colombia, we have managed this barrier through voice notes because the internet connection is difficult for both parties sometimes, for them and me. In the Dominican Republic, is still a challenge since the agenda of our community partner is tight. In this case, Joanna Peterson and all her team are working hard to curb the consequences of the pandemic in their region. Therefore, it is sometimes difficult to contact her. In Nicaragua, we have managed this barrier through WhatsApp calls or Zoom calls, but in this country, we have not completed the interviews. It's missing one coordinator and their respective beneficiaries. Another challenge has been the different natural emergencies that we have in El Salvador. For example, Amanda storm that stopped the actions of the assessment process for 15 days. Now, the achievements that we have gotten from this process are: all the coordinators from El Salvador and Colombia have been interviewed. In Nicaragua is missing one coordinator, but is about to be confirmed. Subsequently, interviews have been held with the participants of each project partner to learn about their realities. That will help us to better understand the different situations and effects that COVID-19 has left. Much of this process wouldn't have been able to be possible without the help of our volunteers here in El Salvador, who were in charge of the translations of the interviews from Spanish to English. During this process, we have some challenges to contact beneficiaries. In Colombia, the communication with the participants have been very difficult since the coordinator doesn't have contact with some of them. Some others don't have smartphones, or so the interviews can be held. But we have had the opportunity to interview one community leader, in this case, Luz Dari. In El Salvador and Nicaragua are missing some participants that are about to be confirmed. The interviews of each participant have been possible through WhatsApp, voice notes, calls to their cell phones, and Zoom meetings. Once the information has been collected, we'll be able to understand the best way to continue our work with the project partners and create a different mechanism of responding to this and future crises. Now, I want to share with you some of the questions and the perspectives that the interviewees have shared in general about the impacts of this pandemic. The first question is related to the personal experience since the COVID-19 outbreak, meaning how were things in their household and community before the crisis, and how are they different now? How their life was disrupted by the virus, and how this experience has affected them, specifically as a man, woman, girl, boy. We generally found that due to the pandemic and the measures taken in different countries, several people stopped their work. And an example of this was a comujerza who stopped working, and many women dedicated themselves to caring for children, grandchildren. In a few words, they stopped receiving their own income and began to depend financially on their husbands or sons and daughters or other family members. Communities are more vulnerable. Unemployment has increased. Education has worsened since boys and girls cannot go to school. Many are not receiving the necessary content, and it is the mother who fills the role of teacher. This is also a problem because many women don't have the knowledge to help their children in complicated math or science subjects. It is not the same if they could have a teacher closely. On the other hand, not everyone has access to internet or computers to do the homework and deliver them. At the national level of each country, especially El Salvador and Colombia, there are deficiencies in this sense that virtual education can be a sustainable possibility. On the other hand, the expenses in relation to cleaning products have increased. They don't only have to worry about having food, but also buy masks, alcohol, and etc. In other cases, we also found that the pandemic has been an opportunity to reconnect with their families and with themselves. They shared with me that they had time to share more with families. This situation helped them think a little about themselves also. The second question is related to the impacts of COVID-19 in their relations and trust in their communities. The answer we got is that people don't trust each other. The issue of COVID-19 becomes a reason for discrimination in many places. For example, sharing with Maria Felix in Nicaragua, she told me that when somebody knows someone with COVID-19 or that this person have had COVID, they don't want it to sell products in small markets in the area to them. Furthermore, there are ties in the communities that have weakened, and people cannot visit another neighbor or even their relatives. Although in some areas, people have shared more, in the sense that ties of solidarity are closer. In El Salvador, in Zaragoza, Teresa, who is the coordinator, told me that they share food with each other, and she knew the name of her neighbors finally. The same I can say, this is my personal experience about where I live. The neighbors here where I live organized to make a garden in a small property that we have here, and they are growing corn and other vegetables. But obviously this is not the same in all the places where this pandemic is. So now the third question is about if the local or national government has provided resources that they and their community are relying on. The responses varied widely. While in El Salvador, many received help from the government, others received more help from organizations such as IPM, that from the local government or the central government. In Nicaragua, in the face of Ortega's silence, which has never spoken before the population, and everything continues as if nothing, populations suffer more than ever from unemployment and extreme poverty. Basic resources such as water, electricity, and food has risen in prices. In Colombia, they have not received the aid promised by the government either, and they are working as they can. In the Dominican Republic, at first glance, people do have support from the government, but that aid has not covered the entire population. There is vulnerable population that doesn't contemplate aid, And that is why Joanna Peterson, the social ministry, continues to supply this lack. In the fourth question, they share the coping mechanism that their community is using to face the different problems that our project partners have. Many resort to prayer with God or have changed activities such as doing exercise at home, reading more books, and spending time with the family. On the the psychological help provided by Vicky, Adela, with the workshop on how to handle emotions, the dance workshop that Vicky worked on, and now we are working on a workshop to overcome grief. This is how our project partners have been able to face in some way this situation. In the fifth question, they shared if in their community, is there anyone who is particularly vulnerable to the health, economic, political, and social impacts of COVID-19? As a general responses, we have that on the one hand, they are women because in countries like Nicaragua, Colombia, El Salvador, they are in charge of caring for children and the elderly, or because levels of violence inside their houses have increased. Also because many women are engaged in trade informal and therefore don't receive income to support their families and cover basic household expenses. Likewise, there are the children who are not receiving a quality education since they are not going to school. Many don't have access to internet, and communication with teacher is very difficult to understand the contents. On the other hand, the food that they receive at home, because if the family incomes falls, the chance that children receive quality food is reduced, and socialization with other children and recreational spaces affects them greatly. Finally, we have the elderly. Since COVID-19, they are the most vulnerable. They cannot go to the doctor routinely because many have chronic diseases. COVID-19 affects them much more. Likewise, they depend on their relatives financially, then it becomes a very frustrating situation for them. In the sixth question, they share the needs of their community since the crisis happened. And we see in a general way that the needs increase. For example, unemployment, the need for recreation spaces. Many people live in very small spaces and on other occasions crowded, so the confinement becomes desperate. Needs to get masks and cleaning supplements, to get vitamins. Recently, I spoke with Teresa from Acomujersa, and she told me that they were looking at how to get vitamins for the members of the cooperative and to strengthen the immune system. And finally, the seventh question was for the coordinators or a staff member about the affections of COVID-19 and their work. Some coordinators have lost alliances and donors, as in the case of Nicaragua and Colombia. That is, their existence is in danger. In Colombia, el Centro de Formación para la Paz is closed, and they have lost contact with the beneficiaries because many don't have access to mobile phones or don't have WhatsApp. In other cases, the projects have to prioritize how to change the way of working. For example, opting for online meetings, seeing how else to sell. Many others have stopped workshops or meeting, which was the way they found to impact more people. And with little access to technology, it is not possible to continue in any other way. In projects dedicated to education, there are deficiencies in accessing Wi-Fi and smartphone. Teachers have limits in this regard. They have had to continue through videos and or through the delivery of guides to help the students, as is in the case of El Patronato Lidia Cogiola. Something, and this is like everything that I have to share with you in regards of like in that general overview, what is some information that that we have analyzed. But something that I want to add is that this process has helped reconnect communication with our project partners, and we are obtaining firsthand knowledge of how COVID-19 and the different measures have affected and deepened social inequalities, the contradiction of this economy system, neglect of human rights, etc. Now more than ever, it is time to continue solidarity with others, because for many project partners, IPM is the only organization that continues to accompany them. This pandemic endangers the existence of many project partners because they have lost other important alliances due to the pandemic. Therefore, I can say that this pandemic has modified not only the work of our project partners, but also the work of IPM and their staff. However, thanks to the great work of everybody and the support we receive from Joe, Ilse, Ade, and Ali, this process has ensured the support that IPM is committed to meet. Thank you. I don't know if you have any question or comments. You can go ahead.
Hey, Eneyda, that was wonderfully done. I love the way you ended that. I was trying to write that down. So if you can remember exactly what you said, or I'll look at the recording, the way you talked about solidarity and accompaniment and the importance of IPM and the partnership model we have, particularly at a time like this, was just beautiful. And I know, as I said earlier, we were a little worried that without Alyssa joining, we wanted to be sure to provide as full of an update as possible, but I think you did a beautiful job. And Alyssa was actually just texting me and may join in at any moment. There are a few others that joined in both on Facebook. I noticed that Candelaria is now with us from El Salvador, old and dear friend of IPM, and many of you have met and benefited from her beautiful singing and her protest songs over the years in commemoration with the murder of Romero and the women and the Jesuits and the annual celebrations or commemorations there. I see Peter. Peter, welcome. And anyone, I think we can open it up now for any questions or comments. You can type them in directly to the Facebook feed or the Zoom chat, or just unmute yourself and share them directly. And again, we do have Adela and Mahesh on the Zoom call, so if either one of you would like to add anything in relation to your own work, please feel free to do so. But thank you again, Eneyda. That was wonderful. Carol, it looks like that's a question.
Yes, this information is so in detail, so critical. I think that this is an area that no other organization that I have heard of, government or otherwise, is even approaching. And it sounds like it is so vital. Is there a plan down the road to maybe share this with other organizations, whether they be government, local, international, whatever? I think that that's a great possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I speak. Go ahead, Eneyda.
Yeah, well, I think that we are like with the first findings, but we are thinking on to create a contingency plan to respond better to this crisis and for future crises. Yeah, that's what I have to say.
I would say internationally, we are hopeful that and this research and this work, particularly from our regional partners, has already garnered the support of a number of new donors. Ilse was sharing with us the other day, I think it's something like 50. I might be a little off on that number. I want to say 52 lapsed, if you will, LAPSED donors just responded to the latest appeal, which of course builds on a lot of this research and what we're learning. Alyssa saw her for a minute. There she is. Maybe she might be able to say something about her own ideas about how we would present this. But Carol, I think you're right, certainly right to point out, and this is no way critical of myself or anyone, well, it could be of myself, but anyone that went before me. It's been a stunning revelation and documentation of what's happening already, and we're really only at the tip of the iceberg. But I'd certainly turn it over to Alyssa, who's much more of an expert in this than I am.
This just sounds like it is groundbreaking information and opportunity.
Yeah, I couldn't
I'm sorry,
agree.
I missed the question. So,
Carol was asked. Carol, do you want to restate your question or your comment, and so Alyssa can respond?
My recent one is just that, to me, the data that is coming out of what you are doing is groundbreaking, and it is something that, I forgot the other word that I was using, but it's something that is just not, we are not hearing anything like this. And I think that it's something that is it's an opportunity for IPM, for everybody, to work with this. I am excited about it.
yeah, I would say the first thing that Eneyda and I had discussions about was making sure that the information that we're gathering and frankly, extracting from communities is then shared back with them. They have a small scope of their experience, and so making sure that they're connected to the larger process was one of our first priorities. So making sure that the reporting is translated into Spanish, anything that we sort of produce from this is then disseminated to these populations. And then we can explore conversations about how do we connect this with other institutions, or like you were saying, pursue opportunities for additional funding or additional advocacy support. How do we to move that forward? But our first priority is making sure that the partners then get insights into the information that we gathered, and then we can explore opportunities beyond that. Eneyda, I don't know if you have additional insights into Carol's question.
She actually spoke to it a little bit right before you joined us, Alyssa. But I would joke, and I think this is true, that this is, it's certainly PhD quality research. I mean, if someone wanted to do a dissertation around this, they certainly could. I mean, I think Carol is absolutely right that this is groundbreaking, and I don't frankly know of any other organization that's taking this level of care, not only to gather the information, but to be sure, as Alyssa said, that it's shared directly and ultimately benefits, the most importantly, those who are sharing the information with us. I think that Matt.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it's not only a top-down research, but I think it's a bottom-up research in that sense. And for us here in India and Nepal, we get an opportunity to know how the world is responding to it in terms of what's the United States, what's happening in the Latin American countries, Africa and India. It's been a great educational tool for us to get to know what's happening and how globally people on the ground are responding to these issues. I think there is greater understanding, greater solidarity amongst all our partners with what's happening globally. So I just wanted to add that to the research component. And it's a kind of action research in many ways. It's not just research. So some of these questions, they provoke reflection, sometimes response, sometimes new strategies based on the interaction that we have been having. I'll be sharing more of that later on with Alyssa when she goes ahead and documents. So I just wanted to add this to the conversation.
Mahesh, can you just say a word about the action research you use? That a lot of discussions, I'm sure how familiar everyone else is. It might be helpful to hear your perspective on that, if you're willing.
Yeah, sorry, I missed out. Your voice sort of disappeared.
Oh, I was saying that you mentioned that this was sort of action-orientated research, and I know you and I about that over the years, but I think it would be helpful for other people to hear that perspective.
And just to give an example, yesterday I was having a conversation with Bindya Makwana, who works with Pochabai Foundation, and Himmat. And we were talking about how many of the Anganwadi teachers were supposed to go house to house and teach children, because give them homework and check on their health and other facilities. And we just realized that none of them have any protective equipment, even though they work with various schools and government schools. The government does not provide them with masks, doesn't provide them with face shields and other things. So just this morning when I was discussing with Himo, and I thought, oh yeah, this is a good idea. Why don't we write to the government, asking them to provide at least these frontline workers with some basic equipment which helps them not only protect themselves, but to provide assistance to all the children. This is one example. The other one that we spoke about was there was a government fund that was being transferred to many of the beneficiaries who are poor, who are below poverty line. And it's ridiculous. It's like 500 Indian rupees. So that's like maybe $8, around $8 per month. You can't survive on $8 per month, a family of 4 on food and other essentials. So that was the other issue we thought that I think we need to write about and respond. So these are some of the things which, in terms of how to intervene, even at the policy level, this was triggered off based on the interview that I took with when I interviewed Vindhya, and the framework was provided by Alisa, the framework of questions. So just pointing out how one thing leads to the other, and how we got a chance to sit and to reflect and take a step backwards rather than rush into more and more COVID relief, and figure out how do we need to work in the coming months.
Thank you, Mahesh. Who else? Anyone else have a question or comment? I thought I saw a hand or a question earlier. Mahesh, it might be important if you could just explain to those who don't know, if you can hear me, sorry. The woman that you referenced that's working with Pochabai, who's also now interning or serving as a fellow with you in India, because that's also some exciting news, and there's some folks on the call that have been to India or would like to go, so I think they'd like to hear that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I hope we get a chance to have Vindhya also on one of these calls. One of the greatest things is that she's bilingual. She speaks both Gujarati and English, and she studied in a Catholic school, so she has had the best of educational facilities that Catholic schools provide to very distant villages and rural areas. More than that, she has been actively participating and working with children in 14 activity centers. I remember when Peter had visited us, there were more than 500 to 600 kids sitting and attending his concert. So many of these girls and many of these young boys and girls are actually her students now. So there are 14 activity centers, and they're covering around 700 students there. And she coordinates that program. That program is supported by many people locally from the villages. Pochabai Foundation, of course, I'm sure many of you know, who have visited India, and you've heard him speak on the previous sessions. So she coordinates these programs, and she has a very clear, distinct gender perspective on things. She has a modern perspective on things because she's younger and she belongs to the younger generation. And I think we are very happy to have her since early this year. And very happy in South Asia, especially because leadership is lacking on these issues. Most of them like cushy government jobs. Secondly, she has the right background and the right experience of reading, learning, and understanding about these issues. Thirdly, she's an independent-minded woman, a young person who thinks through all these issues. I mean, she would call me out if she doesn't agree on what I think or say. So that's not typically Indian. So to that extent, I think it's a big relief in some ways for all of us who have been searching and seeking young leadership, and to have it in a young woman who is from a Dalit family, who's from the rural areas, is like a blessing from God. So I'm sorry if I sound over enthusiastic, but it just shows the crisis that we face in leadership here. We just don't have enough people. We have plenty of projects. We have plenty of mega projects. You have many people who are ready to sit in fancy cars and fancy offices and do a lot of work, but a very few people who actually live in the villages and stay there. I mean, she could easily get a high-paying job in any of the cities, and I'm sure Himmat would agree with that. And I must, of course, we must be grateful to Himmat and Ramesh and his family for initiating this connection with India, and so I'm grateful for that. On behalf of the IPM family also, I hope you all get to meet sometime.
Yeah.
Thank you. Adela, is there anything you would like to add for? I don't know if you're still muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was. Hi, everyone, and thanks, Eneyda, for that wonderful presentation. I just wanted to really point that everything that you mentioned in the presentation, it's important not only to improve the work that we're doing in terms of accompaniment for our projects, but also to share this information with our IPM partners and IPM friends and family. It's very important because it gives us the view from the reality of our project partners, not the reality that we want to see, not that reality we feel comfortable with. We cannot deny that many of the realities that our project partners are facing are challenging. And so we get to see through this information face to face that reality. And when we do that, when we accept that reality, we can work with it. There's no other way. And I think that to accept that reality, we need to, as Mahesh was saying, be looking through the eyes of the people that are struggling with different situations and issues and injustice in the communities, not only here in El Salvador, but worldwide. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to learn from the bottom to start changing the things and creating more solidarity networks that allows us to change things. So yeah, I'm really thankful with Alisa as well, because she has been a wonderful leader and guide for this process. And yeah, it's been amazing working with you two, and we are really looking forward to continue doing it.
Thank you, Adela.
Of course.
I think we might have, if anybody just has enough.
You're muted, Joe, I think. I didn't hear the last thing you said.
Joe looks muted, yeah.
I think he is having problems with the internet connection.
Yeah,
That's
he's
not-
had-
Hey, Joe, you're muted.
Connection is dropped, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. You hear me at all now?
Oh, a little techno, Joe.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you hear me at all now?
Yeah.
Okay, my apologies. I was just going to say we had another minute for another question or comment, but I just ate it up. Again, we're going to pause this program for the month of August. So I apologize to those of you who have really enjoyed being a part of this every Friday. After talking to the staff and their own schedules for the month and people's desire to get a little break in the midst of all this, we decided that we would take the month of August off for the virtual forum program. Well, most of us will still be working, though there'll be people taking holidays throughout the month. You'll be able to reach Ilsa or I at all times if such is the case and needed. But for now, we're not going to go forward with any additional virtual forums until the week after Labor Day, the first Friday after Labor Day. So we'll look forward to seeing you all again then. We do have a forum this afternoon, again with Martha and Luz Dari from Colombia. That will be at 2 o'clock and in Spanish. So if you'd like to join us on this Zoom feed or on Facebook, you're certainly welcome to do that. And I want to thank you all, especially those of you who've worked really hard to prepare these many different presentations we've had over the course of the last 3 months. I think this has been a really wonderful step forward for IPM in our sharing and our model of partnership. And as Mahesh and Eneyda both said so well, really expressing our solidarity and the prioritization this organization has always given to our partners' voices. So thank you for those of you who have joined with us, particularly the board members who have faithfully participated in each of these programs. They are available on Facebook and will continue to be available on YouTube as well. So you can always check them out at the IPM Connect. That our domain on our email is also our YouTube page. And you can also see them on Facebook. If you have any difficulty seeing any of those programs or downloading them, please just let Ilsa or I know directly. And again, special thanks today to Eneyda for stepping up and providing that really wonderful update on the COVID assessment process that we've been going through, and Alyssa and Adela as well for the participation and leadership on this, and Mahesh for all the wonderful feedback from our South Asian office. So thank you all again for being with us again this Friday, and hope you have a wonderful August. I hope you, though I cases I and may the people understanding be with you throughout the coming weekend and the month ahead. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye,
Been a
everyone.
privilege.
Take care.
Adios.
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 Adios.